And now the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today has spoken to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, saying that Ukraine can count on the UK to provide support for the long term. This comes after President Zelenskyy warned of a step up in Russian drone attacks. Well, Russia's defence ministry has admitted that 63 soldiers were killed in a missile strike that destroyed a temporary barracks in the east of Ukraine. Ukraine claims up to 400 soldiers were killed. Well, let's get the latest on the situation now. Joining me is retired Air Vice-Marshal Sean Bell. Sean, good to see you. Sure. Let's talk about the Prime Minister's commitment to Ukraine, again, reiterating it to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, long-term support for Ukraine. What's your reaction to that? It's important that this is said, openly, isn't it? Just to bolster morale, not just weapons and financial aid.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's two sides to it. The UK has been a long-term supporter of this war in Ukraine. This was a great opportunity for the two leaders to discuss the progress of the war, but also discuss these relentless strikes on the critical national infrastructure of Ukraine and also how to combat that. Almost certainly President Zelenskyy took the opportunity to thank Sunak as well, because we've just completed delivery of about 1,000 surface-to-air missile systems to Ukraine, and undoubtedly they've been part of the reason that Ukrainian military is becoming more and more effective at shooting down some of the Russian missiles.
President Zelenskyy said this morning that Russia is going to step up their drone attacks on Ukraine. What do you make of those comments?
Yeah, the relentless waves of attack, they've been going on all over Christmas and New Year as well. A lot of them being conducted using this Shahed 136 drone from Iran. They've been targeting the critical national energy infrastructure of Ukraine across the whole country. And it's worth re-emphasising again, these are not military targets. So why is Russia keep doing it? I think there's three main reasons, one of which is to try and erode the will of the population. Mm-hmm. It may be cold in the UK, it's fearsomely cold out in Ukraine at the moment. And therefore, if you make life as miserable as possible for the population, potentially undermines support for Zelenskyy. In reality, it seems to have quite the opposite effect. Second reason is that Russia's retribution, because things are not going well for the Russians on the battlefield. They've given up 50% of the territory that they once had taken. And also, the Ukrainians have effectively targeted the Engels Air Force Base, comfortably some way behind the front line. And thirdly, it's momentum. Russia needs momentum on the battlefield. It needs to buy time. It needs to buy time to rearm, retrain, re-equip and get ready for a spring offensive. And if you can distract the Ukrainian military by having to track and then shoot down all these missiles, potentially that's another reason why they're doing it.
Can I just go back to something we mentioned at the start of this, and that was the attack on the temporary Russian barracks inside Ukraine. What more are we hearing about that attack?
Well, yes, it was a Ukrainian strike on a Russian military concentration point. It happened at Makivka here, which you'll see is literally only about 13 kilometres away from the front line, so it's very, very close. The attack was done using the Ukrainian HIMARS system, which has been provided by the Americans. It's been used since about June of the year. It's got about 100-kilometre range. The Ukrainians, as you say, claim that they have killed 400 Russians and 300 casualties. In response, the Russians have said that they acknowledged the attack. They say 2 of the 6 missiles that were fired they managed to shoot down, but 4 got through, and they admit that 63 Russians lost their lives. Now, in this information war, what actually happened is actually very difficult for us to say. What is interesting is that Russians rarely turn around and confirm any reports like this. So the very fact they've admitted it is very telling. And also independent sources, we're seeing some of the wreckage here. Independent sources say that about over 600 military personnel were actually present in this facility. So it's quite feasible that there were a large number of casualties. I think the two main points come from this for me, one of which is the use of precision weapons by Ukraine provided by the West. Russia at the moment is using 20,000 artillery rounds a day, carpet bombing. They're unguided with limited effect apart from just devastating everywhere around them. Whereas the use of precision weapons, the salvo 4 weapons, can actually have a devastating effect on the battlefield. And the second point I would make is that this is a really good example of what happens when you use conscript army that are ill-experienced, ill-equipped, ill-trained and lacking the right equipment. Because, first of all, they should not have all been collecting at a point so close to the front line. And secondly, if reports are to be believed, many of the conscripts were using their own mobile phones. They are very easily tracked, and once you get a collection of those together, that will be all the intelligence that will be needed to make that a key focus for an attack. So it's a really clear lesson, which the Russians have paid a huge price for not learning.
Yeah, clearly, as you can see from these scenes. Sean, thank you, Sean Bell.